Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My lords, I must begin, as others have, by thanking the noble lady Baroness Lister of Bertisset for both tabling these amendments and her excellent introduction to them, a very comprehensive introduction. I'm speaking both to Amendment 34 in her name and also signed by the noble ladies Baroness Meacher and Sherlock. And I'm also offering the Green Party's very strong support for 150, 152, 153 and 190. It is a pity that the systems of your lordship's house don't allow more than 4 signatures, so the chance to show the full breadth of political support for some of these amendments, for all amendments, and particularly these very important ones. I want to thank the noble. I'm going to treat with all of these as a group because I think they very much fit together. And I want to thank the noble lady Baroness Lister, particularly for her reference, which I think refers specifically to 153, to the bedroom tax. And it is worth highlighting again in the age of COVID-19, just the pernicious effects of forcing siblings into sharing rooms with the absolute impossibility of self-isolating should that be needed. And to think about in the context of where we see households fleeing domestic abuse, what kind of impact that being forced to share rooms might have. Now, the noble lady Baroness Lister, in her introduction to this group, said, and I quote, "The government has a moral duty not to facilitate abuse." And she indicated that that was acknowledged. And I would argue that even if you simply want to look at this on a financial scale, as some might want to do, keeping victims of domestic abuse and children in those families in situations of domestic abuse, the costs of that, even in purely financial terms, are absolutely enormous and really need to be considered. Now, I think both 150 and 152, that the advance not need to be repaid and that the benefit cap not be applied, both of these policies are hugely damaging to everybody affected by them. But if we think about the domestic abuse situation, and others have focused on the negative impacts, I'd invite your lordship's house to consider the positive impacts. If the government were to give way and this amendment were to be adopted, just think of the relief, the improvement in lives that would create for victims fleeing domestic abuse, to be able to get that very modest sum of money, not as an advance, but as a payment that can meet essential needs in those 5 weeks before universal credit kicks in, with no debt burden being applied afterwards as a result. I think we can think about of simple measures that could be taken at very modest cost. That would be a really great case study. And if we think about the benefit cap, a hideous, populist, nonsensical measure that's playing to the worst of the tabloids, there's often suggestions that this will mean, well, people won't have children if the benefit cap's going to be applied. Well, this is obviously a situation where people are forced to flee domestic abuse. When they chose to bear those children, this was not something in almost all cases that would have been in the forefront of their mind. Now, I want to particularly address in terms of 34, to which I've attached my name. In some ways, it could be argued that this calling for a report on the impact of universal credit should be unnecessary. It's both obvious in terms of the underlying assumptions of universal credit being paid as a household payment. The assumption is that couples work in unison and unity, so that it's not just when domestic abuse is happening that may well not be the case. It's not a reasonable assumption to assume that all money that goes into a household is equally available or available according to need to all members of that household. Any kind of power imbalance, and it doesn't have to be going to the lengths of domestic abuse, means that there's unequal access to household resources. And that's why one of the reasons why I very strongly believe in a universal basic income as something that would give people that agency, that control over their lives. And I said that arguably this report is not necessary. I would refer noble lords to an excellent report from the Women's Budget Group titled Universal Credit and Financial Abuse, Exploring the Links. And one element of that looks particularly at the issue of what is financial autonomy, and it defines financial autonomy as reflecting independence, having an independent income and a sense of ownership and not having to ask for money. Privacy, being able to make your own financial decisions without surveillance or oversight. An agency, simply having access to the money. So I would say that in a way, if we were to see the government to announce that it immediately plans to end the single payment system, then we wouldn't need this amendment at all. I can but live in hope. I do also want to raise one issue that's not yet been raised by anyone else, and this is an issue raised by Women's Aid in 2019 that I don't believe has been addressed, although I'd be delighted if the noble lady, the minister, could tell me that I'm wrong. And this is the issue of the need to have evidence of universal credit payments to access legal aid. I should perhaps declare my position on the APPG on legal aid at this point. And now, in a blog on the Trussell Trust website in 2008 and 19, the middle of that year, they pointed out that as it takes time, that 5 weeks, to get the evidence that universal credit is being received, then people are not able to access legal aid. But in that time, the victim of domestic abuse may well have to attend court, particularly if that is a situation of questions of child access and child residency. That's the nightmare situation for survivors of having escaped an abuser, then expected to represent themselves in the family courts and not even being able to have a representative who's not a lawyer to speak for them. I have one more issue that I would like to raise, and that is the issue relating to child benefit, which was a universal benefit won by pioneering women MPs in 1975 that was tragically lost in 2013 when the universality is removed with sadly little attention or debate. Now, this is applied by means of the high income child benefit charge, and from the 1st of April, that will be hitting some people who are actually basic rate taxpayers for the first time. Now, I'd ask the noble lady, the minister, either now or in writing, whether she's able to address how this situation with the high income child benefit charge interacts with victims of domestic abuse, because it's clearly a very complex situation. But again, we come back to the situation that you don't actually have to be in situations of domestic abuse to assume that everyone has access to the resources they need within a household, even if that household should have adequate resources. It is a situation where we need benefits for children, benefits for individuals, universal basic income. But in the meantime, inclusion of all of these amendments in this bill would be a really significant and important step, and I really hope we'll see movement from the government on this issue. Thank you, my lords.